Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell is a hefty tome about the rivalry between two English magicians set around the Napoleonic Wars. Not abracadabra stage magicians, but full-on wizards. It's a historical fantasy setting, but it's also a story of adapting to new technologies and how cultural assumptions and political priorities shape the development path. Only in this case, magic can be seen as a stand-in for revolutionary new tech, or rather rediscovered old technology, as the story weaves in an askew history of England that incorporates a rich past of sorcery, yet seamlessly transitions into a mostly familiar version of the early 19th century. The world building is dense without being cumbersome. The book, mimicking the Regency style and rather heavily annotated, takes its time introducing its two magicians. The first several chapters center around Gilbert Norrell as he first dramatically demonstrates that he is in fact a practical magician and not merely a theorist or historian. He goes to London with the broader goal of restoring English magic in a proper and respectable manner. Norrell's approach is quite technical, scientific even you might say, and self-limiting. Significant aspects of magic and its history are excluded from his idea of what respectable English magic should be. It takes some time before we meet Jonathan Strange, another talented magician who becomes first a pupil and then a rival to Norrell over the following several years. Where Norrell is very scholarly and proper in his approach to magic, Strange rushes ahead, not worrying too much about the second-order effects. Norrell's very much a top-down, micromanaging kind of wizard. He hoards all the magical texts and doesn't let his apprentice read half of them. Vast swaths of magic are off-limits, including anything to do with the Raven King, a powerful magician who ruled northern England hundreds of years before.
You wish me to read this book, sir?
Yes, indeed.
Then you must give it to me.
Yes.
But Norrell's caution is not unfounded. Much of the Raven King's magic involves interaction with beings from Fairy, and they are notoriously slippery to work with. Everything is transactional, but you don't always know the terms. And even when you try to pin them down, they can be like a sleazy corporate lawyer, spinning a web that sounds straightforward but traps you in technicalities.
Grant me half her life, and the deal is done.
What would her friends and family say if
Half
they
a
knew?
life is better than none.
Norrell is wise to avoid them. But as is often the case with any new technology, politicians and bureaucrats don't understand it and don't know what to do with it. So when Norrell arrives in London and offers to do magic for the war effort, they blow him off, because that's what functionaries in a stable regime do when a professory little dude in a powdered wig claiming to be a magician shows up at the door.
My dear sir, what has magic to do with the war? I believe I have heard what you did in York, and I'm sure the housewives were very grateful, but I can scarcely see how such magic may be applied to the war.
Norrell eventually gets a chance to prove himself, to get the attention of powerful people, and to secure patrons at the highest levels of British society, when Sir Walter Pole, an influential figure in the government, calls on him to resurrect his freshly deceased wife, Emma. Seeing this one chance, Norrell, against his better judgment, summons a fairy and makes a deal to bring Emma back from the dead. Walter is ecstatic. Word spreads throughout London, and suddenly Norrell's magical services are in high demand, though, as usual, the government officials don't get it and keep asking him to resurrect Horatio Nelson.
Bring him back to life.
He was always the Navy's man, surely Mr. Pitt.
Gentlemen, this magic is extremely dangerous. Consider the condition of Mr. Pitt's body and indeed Lord Nelson's.
So this Fey fellow hauls Emma off every night for hours of tedious dancing at his rundown palace balls, and she spends her days exhausted and increasingly unstable. Also, there's a spell on her, so whenever she tries to tell anyone what's happening to her, it comes out as a seemingly random spew of fairy tales. But Norrell gets his recognition and patronage. To put it in Faucian phrasing, Norrell is the magic. He's the singular voice and source. He doesn't want to train new magicians. He doesn't want to invent new magic. He just wants to collect all the knowledge and apply it in specific and controlled ways. He has the technocratic mindset. Everything must be measured, cataloged, and used in a tightly controlled manner in service of a specific vision of how things should be. And then there's Jonathan Strange. He just does shit. While trying to decide on a profession, because a gentleman really should have one, he encounters a vagrant fortune teller under a hedge who informs him that he is destined to be one of 2 great magicians. And so he announces to Arabella, his wife-to-be, and her family that that is what he will do.
Why on earth would you want to do that? I met a man under a hedge who told me I was a magician.
Did you indeed?
Naturally, Strange fixates on the magic of the Raven King, and rather than relying entirely on books, which he can't really acquire anyway, as Norrell has been buying them all up, he just experiments. Now, there's these 2 polar opposite magicians, Norrell with his careful and respectable system, and Strange in his chaotic whatever-works approach. And of course, when the government learns there's another magician in England, they want Strange and Norrell to work together on the war effort. Strange becomes Norrell's apprentice. Sort of, since half of Norrell's instruction is about making sure he doesn't learn certain things. You remember that I told you there are gaps among the books in his library? Well, it seems that the very day he accepted me as his pupil, he ordered 5 shelves to be emptied and the books sent back to Yorkshire because they were too dangerous for me to read. I'm skipping a lot of the book here to get to the point where the government wants to send a magician to serve with Wellington's army on the continent. Norrell likes his comfortable house in London, and he has no desire to sample army life. So they send Strange. Up to this point, the military use of magic has been fairly restrained. They've been scrying to find the location of Napoleon's armies. Recon in a bowl kind of deal. They send illusions to confuse the French. They give Napoleon bad dreams, things of that sort. And while there's initially a disconnect between what Strange can do and what Wellington says he wants,
can a magician kill a man by magic?
I suppose a magician might. But a gentleman never could.
even with battle mages, wars are won on logistics. After some discussion of the army's difficulty marching and hauling cannon over rough ground, Strange conjures up a road for the army, one that goes right where they want it to. In his customary decisive manner, Wellington pointed out those things which he particularly liked about the road and those things which he did not like. But really, I have hardly any criticism to make. It is an excellent road, only make it a little wider tomorrow, if you please. Before long, Strange is moving rivers, forests, cities, whatever needs to be relocated to convenience the army or confound the French. Also, there's some necromancy, but nobody likes to talk about that. There's a passage that captures something about modern American warfighting, far overseas with vast resources, in a way that only a fantasy setting really can. Thanks to Mr. Strange, my men had good English roads to take them wherever they were needed, and if there was a mountain or a forest or a city in our way, why, Mr. Strange simply moved it somewhere else. The Duke of York remarked that King Ferdinand of Spain had sent a letter to the Prince Regent complaining that many parts of his kingdom had been rendered entirely unrecognizable by the English magician and demanding that Mr. Strange return and restore the country to its original form. "Oh," said the Duke of Wellington, not much interested. "They're still complaining about that, are they?" There's a split between the precise and sterile, respectable magic of Norrell and the rough and dirty, fuel-expedient magic of Strange, but there is also a social division. Strange is now surrounded with military men who respect him for what he can do under fire and with whom he shares a practical, no-nonsense approach to things. Norrell needs a theoretical framework for his magic and prefers working in his library. He attends social gatherings with all the notables of London society, and he's surrounded himself with political creatures, self-serving men like Drawlight and Lascelles, who flatter him because they gain wealth and influence by being his gatekeepers. The only real exception to this is his longtime assistant John Childermass, who is something of a magician himself and isn't just an obedient flunky. Strange's use of magic in the war went further than anything else towards cementing it as a useful and important art. But that military use also frames how it will be used and how it will be perceived going forward. At no point do we read of a national program to rapidly grow crops or divert rivers to irrigate fields, only moving them to facilitate military operations. Magic isn't used to heal the living, only bring back the dead for expedient needs. There's no magically constructed railroads or magical automatons in textile mills. Obviously, it's because the story isn't about that. Susanna Clarke intended to write a novel, not a pointless treatise on social and industrial organization if we somehow hypothetically had wizards. But it does serve as a reminder that deliberate choices and unconscious assumptions determine how we apply technology and where we focus our efforts. And sometimes those choices require deliberate coercive action to maintain. One of Norrell's hangers-on, Mr. Drawlight, has been running scams where he takes commissions from people to have Strange or Norrell perform black magic on their behalf, or for bogus correspondence courses to train them as magicians. After learning of this, Norrell wants to restore the old magical court system.
But Drawlight is not a magician. Surely a common law court.
No, his crimes were specifically magical crimes. We require a magical court.
There is an exchange in the book where Norrell tries to convince a skeptical prime minister to back his plan for a magical court. Oh, but it is very necessary, I assure you, very necessary indeed. How else will we regulate magic? How else will we guard against wicked magicians and their servants? What wicked magicians? There is only Mr. Strange and you. Well, that is true, but do you feel particularly wicked at present, Mr. Norrell? Is there some pressing reason that the British government should establish a separate body of law to control your vicious tendencies? No, or perhaps Mr. Strange is exhibiting a strong inclination to murder, maim, and steal. No, but then all we are left with is this Mr. Drawlight, who, as far as I can tell, is not a magician at all. Meanwhile, Strange is delving further into his efforts to unlock the magic of the Raven King, open the old roads into fairy, and generally understand all the old magic that Norrell finds so disreputable. While Strange is reckless, and he is poking into dangerous things he doesn't understand, Norrell has slipped from careful investigative study into the compulsion to categorize, contain, and control. This becomes his real underlying motive.
I have to have a court of my own.
Mr. Norrell, it is not the duty of any court to exalt one person's opinions above another's. If other magicians think differently from you, you must battle it out with them. You must argue and publish and practice your magic, and you must learn to live as I do, in the face of constant criticism, opposition, and censure. That, sir, is the English way.
But it's much easier to just cancel people that disagree with you. Norrell goes so far as to make every copy of Strange's book disappear. Norrell never gets his special courts, but his rift with Strange becomes so severe that Strange leaves the country. In Venice, he continues his attempts to summon a fairy servant and to master the Raven King's magic. It's quite an undertaking, one that involves Strange deliberately making himself half insane and inadvertently bringing down the wrath of a malicious fairy prince, resulting in Strange being trapped in a pillar of perpetual night that follows him wherever he goes. Perpetual night a few city blocks wide. The locals are quite alarmed. Magic has broken free of its bonds. The knowledge is out of Norrell's tight control and making its way through the world. People all over England are starting to perform magic, and old spells that had long since ceased to work have become viable again. People have an understanding of the world, of how things work and what to expect, and magic is breaking that down. People are confused and scared at what it portends. It is one thing to change Spain by magic, Mr. Norrell, but this is England. Strange and Norrell are not only opposite poles, thesis and antithesis if we want to be Hegelian about it, but also kind of like spigots that once turned let magic flow back into the world, filling it up. We can compare them to inventors, and Strange and Norrell do have a bit of an Edison and Tesla thing going for a while, or scientists whose theories reveal something new about how the world works. It's full of promise and peril. For the first time in his life, Mr. Norrell began to feel that perhaps there was too much magic in England. As is usually the case when I talk about a book here, I'm leaving out a lot of characters, Stephen Black, Vinculus, John Segundus et al., and instead focusing on one central concept. In this instance, with Strange and Norrell being opposite poles of the flood of magic back into the world, clearly they must come together and find a balance between their very different approaches and philosophies. A synthesis, if you will, which of course happens in a crescendo of inevitability as all the threads twist together. And it leaves us with a glimpse of a balanced world, one where the magic is tempered. It's not Harry Potter, anything goes kind of wanton conjuring, but there's something beyond the merely material. Some mystery in the cracks. There's something different about it. It's neither the Neo-Raven King free-form magic of Strange nor the rigid doctrinal magic of Norrell, though people still use those terms as their reference because they can't step out of their models and ideologies to see things for what they are. As the final footnote of the book says, There are very few modern magicians who do not declare themselves to be either Strangeite or Norrellite, the only notable exception being John Childermass himself. Whenever he is asked, he claims to be in some degree both, as this is like claiming to be both Whig and Tory at the same time. No one understands what he means. But he's the one that really understands what's happened. That magic or technology can burst onto the scene and seem at first like either a mere curiosity or the answer to all of our problems. Then it becomes a peril as the dangers are revealed, something that must be held back or buried. But in the end, it finds its place and the world adapts. Whether it's mechanization, splitting the atom, artificial intelligence, or magic, there's a period of adjustment. Some good things, some bad, but always finding some equilibrium until the next unbalancing development. And in the end, while everyone else is caught up in labels and ideological feuds based on yesterday's perceptions, people like John Childermass, laboring in a supporting role with a degree of detachment from the competing sides and philosophies, can see things for what they are.
Is that supposed to be me? With a beard and a pointy hat?